Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to episode 3 of the Straight Outta Prison podcast. My name is James K. Jones, and this is my story.
And I am Haley Jones, and this is his story that has now become a part of my story.
And we're titling this one, we're going to call it The Aftermath.
So last time we talked about the actual day of the event when you got arrested, and
that was a rough day.
Finished basically with you going to sleep on your cot with your roommates in your jail cell. So after not sleeping for 2 to 3 days, what happened next? You woke up the next morning, or I don't know, what does that look like? What next?
I think the first thing I realized when I woke up, because it seemed, you'd wake up in the night and it would seem like a dream. Not really a dream, more like a nightmare. Like this is not happening to me. But just the whole, there was a lot of shock around the, us getting pulled over, and then my cousin pulling the gun out on the cop, and being shot, and so it was hard to process. I mean, I don't know. I can't even explain the feeling. It was just like it was like death almost. It was like I was dead. Like I'm dead. I'm over.
I think it's so interesting too that after you told the story last time of that day, how emotionally drained you were, and you said that you've only told that story 1 or 2 other times, just retelling what happened.
Well, I don't know that I've told like bits and pieces, parts. People ask me questions, but I don't know that I have ever with anyone sat down and just started from the beginning and told everything, all the details. Like, let's go through all the details. And then some of the details I didn't even remember until we started doing it. And I was surprised, I guess, how much it was bothering me. It's just remembering it was the darkness of it, the lead up to it, and then the absolute hopelessness of, the next many years, and just that whole part of my life that I don't think I've ever tried to bury it, because, I've always been open with my story. But just, I guess, having to go back through and sift back through it, I mean, it's a lot to remember, a lot to take in, a lot to do, to deal with.
So you said your life was over, you were dead. I mean, at that point, you thought it was the end. So...
I mean, that's how it felt.
So what happens the next day once you get booked into jail? I mean, with all those
most people
charges.
I mean, not all people, but most people can get a bond, and you get bonded out. You go home and you wait until you go to trial.
And a bond is where you pay money to.
Yes.
Who do you pay money to?
It depends on the state. I'm not sure about Florida, because remember I told you last time. There was a little note on my bond amount said HWOB, which the lady told me, honey, that means hold without bond. You ain't going nowhere. So I never really dealt with that. In Alabama, I know for certain there's bondsmen, people that bond people out of jail. And then generally, like if you have a $100,000 bond, you have to give them 10%. So if you have $100,000, you pay it to the court or the county or whoever arrests you, and then I think they hold the money till you go to trial, and then you get it back. But a bondsman is somebody that comes. It's a racket. It's all the criminal.
Well, that was my
stuff.
question, and maybe it's when you don't know, and I have not thought of it until right now. But when you have $100,000 bond, $100,000, who does that go to? Who gets that money?
It's a security to make sure you're going to show up for trial. So if you had $100,000 and you could give it to them, they would hold it and you would get it back.
Okay.
But most people don't have $100,000, so you have to pay a bondsman. But whatever you pay a bondsman, you don't get back. So let's say you have a $100,000 bond, and you have to come up with $10,000 to give the bondsman just to get you out of jail.
And then the bondsman will give the other $90,000, I guess.
No, he just signs for it. He's like a secure. And also, if you're out on bond, you belong to him. If he wants to come and have you rearrested and pull your bond, it's a lot. There's a lot to that. But also in Alabama, there's property bonds in Alabama. Like, so if something happened where we needed to bond them out, we could take the deed to our house and let them hold that. I mean, God forbid we'd ever have to do any of that, but I mean, that's part of it. There's property bonds, there's cash bonds. Most of them, they're not always that expensive. People like low-level stuff, it might be like a $10,000 bond. Then you got to come up with $1,000 to
Right.
give the bondsman. But let's don't get lost on that.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious.
It's
Okay.
but for me, with the seriousness of my crimes, that was not even an option. So I didn't have that route. I was locked up, and that was that.
No go for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened next? So
So the next morning, I woke up, and I actually didn't wake up. They were hollering my name. They call you inmate. I was inmate Jones. And they were screaming at me through the bars, and I was like in a dead sleep because, all the things. And they woke me up, and they told me to I had to go out for some reason. So I got to the door. They put handcuffs on my arms, then they put handcuffs on my feet, and they walked me out to the front of the sheriff's department into an office with my cousin. That was the first time I saw him after that. That was a crazy morning.
did you just pass by him, or did y'all get to exchange words, or?
I mean, we might have said words. I don't think I had any words for him that morning. He was in shock still. I was in shock. It was early in the morning. They let us out and took us into the room, like a sheriff's office room, where the detective had talked to me the day before. And it was weird walking in the room because there were people everywhere. And there was a judge there, and they were reading us the charges that were charged against us. We were both charged with attempted first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer, which just hearing those words enough. But then they gave me an additional charge of battery on a law enforcement officer because I pushed him. And then just the shock of hearing all that and looking, I was in a fog because I was, coming off of a bender, and
With drugs, you mean?
drugs, yeah. And I looked up and I saw over in the corner, there was a cameraman there with a camera. Like they had us on TV, and it just freaked me out. Like,
So were they live recording for the news, or?
I don't know if it was live or but we were all over the news. By the time I went back to my cell, which was only like 30 minutes later, because I think I talked to a public defender right after that, it might have been an hour, or it might have been an hour. It wasn't very long, but by the time I went back to the little unit that I was being held in, I had been on TV. They have a TV in there. And so by that time, to the other inmates, I was a celebrity. Like, I mean, I didn't want to be a celebrity. I mean, I didn't want that. Like, but they were just like, "Wow, y'all,
You were
whoa."
you were the cracker celebrity.
Yeah, don't say cracker. I don't like that.
Well, you said, I mean, for
no,
me.
I was telling you that's what they call me, but I mean that's derogatory. Like, it's the same. Calling somebody a cracker is the same word as calling like a Jew a name or calling a black person the N word.
But just to clarify, a cracker is a white person.
That's
correct?
That's a derogatory like name that they call you. But I'm not a cracker. I'm a son of the living God. I'm James K. Jones. So, by the time I got back in there to them, I was Al Capone or some notorious criminal, and I just was a little freaked out about that.
Freaked out. Did you like that? Not like that?
No, no. Who wants to be a criminal?
I mean, I don't know, but if you have to be living with this, guys, then you might as well. It's nice to think that you're.
I never took it that way. My cousin, on the other hand, he liked all that. He would, he relished in that. But I always felt like, this cost me my life and my freedom. I don't have any reason to be, bragging about it or acting like I'm some kind of gangster. Or,
So it never affected you that way.
No, I didn't like it. I didn't want it. I mean, I was a criminal because I was doing crimes, but at the same time, like, I knew there had to be either death or something else because that was not. I didn't want that. Mm-hmm. And it was very like later on. We can get into that a little bit later, but later on they actually put me and my cousin in the same cell block so that we could keep each other company because we were going to be there for quite some time. And it was a small town county jail, and the sheriff there got to know our families when they came to visit, because they came twice a week. Somebody came. All the officers, all the correctional officers, they all got to know us. They got to know our family. They got to know. They treated us very well there. They didn't give us many special privileges, but they didn't. They treated us with some dignity, probably that I never saw after that, because I spent a lot of time in some county jails after that. Because what ended up happening was, we talked about all the armed robberies that we were doing, and we were saying that we were so smart by not doing them close to home so that we wouldn't get caught. But what happened after we were arrested for that first one, and I confessed to the one in Panama City because they had the money bag, it didn't take them, I don't think it took them 24 hours to start to put that puzzle together. And then we got a visit from a detective in Montgomery, Alabama. We got a visit from a detective in Shelby County, Alabama. We got a visit from from Dothan, Alabama. So all the pieces started coming together very quickly, and it was a lot.
So I don't think I didn't really understand. You went into that room for about an hour. You saw the cameras, and they basically told you what all of your charges were.
Yeah, an arraignment is when they formally charge you.
So that was the arraignment.
Yes, but then there's another one where you make like your first appearance in court. And that, I say the day that I got arrested was like the scariest day of my life, but then there were a lot of them that came real close to that. Probably the next scariest day was the day I made my first appearance actually in a courtroom. This was not in a courtroom. They just took us at the sheriff's office and read us our formal charges. And then we'll talk about this later, though, but the third probably scariest day of my life was the day I actually went to prison. That was that was quite a day.
From the jail to the prison.
Yes, this is so funny. You do this because you don't understand it, but then people do it all the time. There's a difference between jail and prison. Like, you don't just wake up one morning and go to prison. Like, you have to get locked up, you have to go to jail, you have to have a trial, you have to be charged, you have to, go through the steps, and they are two totally different worlds, two totally different systems. There's two different codes of conduct and how you handle yourself, and they're two different subcultures. Jail is like being locked in a room, for however long you gotta be there. I ended up doing a year and a day in the county jail. I did 6 months in that first county jail, and then I did 6 months in the Bay County jail in Panama City while I was there, facing those charges, waiting to go to prison. So, in a way, it was a relief to take the next step and go to prison, because jail it's hard. That's a hard, it's hard time. It's a very hard time.
What in jail? So what makes it so hard? I mean, besides the obvious fact that you're in jail.
Well, you don't have anything to do.
Okay.
You can, I read books and, try to do push-ups and watch TV, but let's don't get too far into that. I want the next episode to be about just like what it's like to be in jail. But this one wanted to focus mainly on like how my family dealt with the aftermath of the crimes that we committed, how my, friends and people that knew me, that news media stuff really just freaked me out, because we were on the news. We were on the news for like 6 months. Every time we went to court, we were on the news. We were in the newspaper. The officers would bring me the newspapers and like, well, here you're in the newspaper. And I never saw that as like anything good. That was horrific, It's exciting now to be in the newspaper for like a recipe or, the Birmingham News did a story on me right after we opened Cairo's about, my story, my past, and the redemptive side of it. That, like, they told the story on the other side. Those are wonderful news stories. That's exciting. But to be on the news, in the newspaper for something like that is, I don't know, it breaks you down pretty fast. Or it did me. Again, for my cousin, he liked it. He thought he was notorious now, had some kind of credentials maybe that he didn't have before. But for me, I never lost sight of the fact is this cost me my life. And there's not enough money in the world, enough anything in the world to give in exchange for my life. So that's that. Where do we go from here? You want to
So
talk
you
about
said
the courtroom?
let's talk about the courtroom. So
So I think we need to talk about my first little visit with my family, maybe
okay.
first. 'Cause
So
that
so the question is then, when did you first get to see your family after you were put in jail?
it was that second day. I feel like the whole world came down. And I mean, my mom and, I never saw my dad. I talked to him on the phone. And I don't even want to talk about what he said. But they let us see them. Like, let us go in the room with them and see them and talk to them. And, they spent 3 or 4 hours. And they were nice. The officers and the people that ran the jail there were nice because they realized, they had to drive 4 hours to see us. And they were very, I guess, accommodating would be a good word.
So were you and your cousin together in a room with your family, or was it separate?
Together. If this hadn't have been a very small town, we would have been like quarantined from each other because you're not even really supposed to be able to talk to each other when you're co-defendants. Mm-hmm. But I spent my first week or so on one side in one of the units. There was like an A unit and a B unit. I was in the A unit, he was in the B unit. And one of the officers came back there one day and said, the sheriff said, as long as y'all are getting along, we could put you on the same unit so y'all could keep each other company, which that's unheard of that they do stuff like that. But we ended up being in the same little jail cell together for about 6 months before.
You were roommates.
I guess you could call it roommates, but that is a whole different world. And, I struggled, I think, with him. I didn't blame him for what happened, but I did. You know what I'm saying? Because I would just get so annoyed with if I hadn't got hooked up with you again, I would be a chef on a cruise ship somewhere sailing off towards Sweden or, Denmark or Italy or, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be like a traveling chef.
So you're in the room with your families. How did that go?
The first time they came, it was devastating because like my mom, she couldn't function. My mom.
Yeah, but people listening may not know your mom.
My mom is a single mother. She raised me. She was married and divorced 4 times. I had a little brother that was my half brother. We had him till he was 5, and then his dad took him and ran off with him. And so she had everything in her life taken from her, and I was the only thing she had. And she always had this weird, I don't want to say it's weird. She had 5 brothers and sisters. When my mom was 9 months old, her mom left them in an apartment by themselves, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, 18-month-old, and my mom was 9 months old. Just left them. Just decided she was gone. And their dad was an alcoholic and was off somewhere, ended up himself going to prison, and she was raised by her grandparents who, when I talk about my meemaw, that she's actually my great-grandmother because my mom and her brothers and sisters were abandoned by their mom and dad and were raised by their paternal grandparents. And they were in their 50s, getting ready to retire. They'd lived a good life, and they had to take 5 kids and raise them. And it was hard, and they lived in a small town where, people would whisper and say, to my mom could hear them, like that's the one, that their mom left them. So she had like those abandonment issues, and she had been hurt really bad in her second marriage, just totally destroyed. And she lost 1 son, and now I was the only one. I was all she had, really. And I know that that's unhealthy, but at that time I didn't understand how unhealthy that was. I knew that my mom did everything she could to raise me, and I knew that it was hard, and I knew that she had always been there for me, and always would be there for me. And She made a lot of sacrifices for me. She worked in a cotton mill, all through my teenage years. And, Mama made it happen.
So in some way, this is like you being taken away from her.
I was taken away
So
from
if
her.
you can, take me to the moment that you first saw her in that room after you were arrested.
I really, honestly don't like thinking about it. It was horrible. It was just horrible. And she just a shock. And if I would have known, I didn't know. She's saying I didn't. Why didn't
Because she had no idea that you were doing anything like this.
Nobody
robbing or on drugs.
had an idea of what I was doing. Everybody kind of suspected he was doing something, but nobody had like a real inside to me because I had it very concealed. Now, I think she knew I was up to something because I had more money than I'd ever had before, but I think we talked about that later on. She thought maybe I was selling drugs or doing something, something like that, but not anything like this.
So did she cry? Was she angry? Did she want to slap you? I mean, I feel like people have different emotions. True. I think when these things happen that you don't know how you're going to react until it happens. So how for her, what did that look like?
I think for my mom, the biggest thing for her was she felt like she had failed me as a mother. Which is, I'm 20 years old, I'm a grown, and I try to tell her that I'm grown, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. That doesn't reflect on you. It doesn't mean you failed. Like, she did that for years where she said it was her fault. Everything's my fault.
Well, I really do think that if you're a parent, and whether it's true or not true, it's hard not to think, what did I do or what could I have done different?
No, I can see that. But in this case, just knowing how I got there, what I was doing, knowing that I knew the risks when I got myself involved in that, I made the decision that I was going to be a criminal. And that was the hardest part for me, was what it did to my family, what it did to my mom. It destroyed my mom. In some ways, and I've told you this, and you've told me that I feel like she's never been the same since then. She's never been the same. And, she's had the last 21 years with me. She lives close to us. She lived with me for a while after I got out of prison, seeing stability and, the other side. And so I think she's got peace with me now. But those years, those were some rough years for her and for me. And not just her, my granny, she came down that day with them from Atlanta, and she was just, nobody ever was mad at me. They were just, their hearts were broken. I never felt like judged or accused, even though I probably should have been. I judged and accused myself, but for my family, they were just heartbroken. Heartbroken, and willing to do whatever, we need to do now. But anytime I get to talk to kids now that are kind of going down the wrong path, I tell them my story. You're not just doing it to yourself, you're doing it to your family. And I may have said this on the last podcast, and I'll say it again because it was something I thought about almost every day while I was gone. When you get locked up and you go to prison, you don't go by yourself. You take the people that love you, you take them with you. And, I'm a father now. I couldn't imagine, one of my kids being in that situation. And for me, it was a hopeless situation because it looked like this is never going to end because we had too many charges. We had done too much. It was like a death sentence, and it really was. And I'm not saying that to like garner like pity or feel sorry for me, because I did the thing. I wasn't locked up for some suspicion. I did the thing. I was robbing people. So I was where I was supposed to be. That's what happens. That's justice.
So, how many years were you looking at? Like, once the reality and the charges and all, I mean, what was concrete? How many years were they saying you needed to serve? I think that's how you say it, serve for your crime.
Okay, if you get charged, like, let's say you kill somebody in Jefferson County here in Alabama right now, and you get locked up, you get arrested, you're going to trial or court or whatever, you're looking at 20 years, 30 years, whatever they say, whatever the crime calls for. That was the problem with us, was that we had so many crimes. We were initially charged with attempted murder of a law enforcement officer. Then I was charged with battery of a law enforcement officer, which I thought was ironic that I got 2 charges and he only got 1, and he's the one that pulled the
Yeah.
gun. But we also had 7, 8, 9, 10 other charges in 2 states that came down on us. So it was like, looking at that, it was an insurmountable situation. Like, this is never going to be over with. This is never going to be over with.
But just to give us an idea, because just coming from someone who does not know what this charge and that charge and this charge, how many years were you looking at around?
One armed robbery by itself in Florida and in Alabama averages a 20-year sentence. One armed robbery.
Holy cow.
But let me tell the story of the first time I went to court. It was like day 3 or day 4 where they came and they said, "You're going to court tomorrow." And I said, "Do I need to have my family here?" And they said, No, it's just it's like your initial first appearance. You don't need anybody there. You'll have your attorney, because they had appointed me like this crackerjack. I won't say his name. I'll never forget his name. But he was the public defender for Jefferson County there, and he was the only public defender. So he was everybody's lawyer because it was a small town. Like in bigger towns, there might be 15 or 20 public defenders. Like when I got to Bay County, which is Panama City, I had a public defender, and there was a dozen others. But in this town, there was one public defender, and he was, how do you say it? Maybe I shouldn't even say it. He was just not... Was
he not a good person?
He was not desirable. And they tried to hire me a lawyer. Nobody would even talk
Who's they tried to hire you?
My
a lawyer?
mom, my grandmother, my aunts and uncles. They tried to pull their money together and hire me a lawyer. I think they wanted like $25,000 to even initially talk to me because my charges were so serious. And then, my cousin ended up having to get a lawyer because he was looking at worse than me, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And my aunt and her husband had to put out a second mortgage on their house just to get him a lawyer, just for that part. But for me, the day they took us, it was like day 3 or day 4. I'm still in shock. I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure out, jail and all the things. And we'll talk about jail life a little bit in the next podcast. But they took us, shackled up our feet, shackled up our hands, put us in the back of a van. Kind of like, I felt like I was in like a dog catcher movie.
Yeah.
But I was the dog, and they were the dog catchers. I mean, that's how it felt. Like they squish you in there, and it's just everything's metal or steel or like stone. There's no comforts. I mean, that's part of it. You get locked up, you're in there. But they took us maybe half a mile up the street to the Jefferson County Courthouse in Monticello, Florida, and it looked like Monticello. It was designed after Thomas Jefferson's home. So it kind of looked like that, but it was painted white. And it was old, and it was creaky, and it's just, you felt like you had went back in... Have you ever seen that movie, A Time to Kill, about the Mississippi lawyer?
Yes, but it's been a long time.
But it was an old courthouse in Mississippi. Okay. I mean, it felt like that. It was just, you walk in, you could tell it was like a historical building. It had been there for a couple 100 years, and the floors creaked. Mm-hmm. And when they locked us in a room, but then when they pulled us out, you walked in this courtroom, and it was like something you saw... Maybe on a movie. I couldn't remember where I thought I'd ever saw that before, but the judge is like lifted up like half a story above you. So you walk in front of him, But you can't just look at him. You got to turn and you got to look up to him. And he's like looking down on you, like the wrath of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I was expecting nothing because they said it was not a big deal. Your public defender will be there. Go. I walk in, I looked up at him, and he read my charges. He said, Mr. Jones, you're charged with attempted first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer and a lesser charge, which is a felony of battery on a law enforcement officer. And this carries 25 years minimum mandatory to life in prison. Do you understand your charges? And when I heard 25 years minimum mandatory means you will serve 25 years to life, I just started bawling. Like I wasn't even embarrassed or,
So just right then and there in front of the judge and
I
everyone,
I lost my mind. Like I couldn't stop crying. And then they were, like, okay, whatever. But they took me back there was like 5 or 6 of us there that day. They took us back to the room because everybody had to come out one at a time. And you know how people say I almost did that in my pants? Mm-hmm. I almost did that in my pants. Like, that's how I felt. Like, I was, like, my body was revolting against me. It was rough. And I remember it was, like, mid-morning, and I got back to the jail, and I had learned how to use the collect calls. And I couldn't get my mom to answer the phone. I couldn't get my aunt to answer the phone. I couldn't get my uncle. I couldn't get anybody. So I was desperate, so I called my dad. And he was not very... he didn't have a lot to give to me in the way of fatherly advice.
Well, I think we all want to know what he said.
I don't... It was very condescending. And I get it. I mean, I'm his only son.
Do you not remember what he said? Or
I remember what he said. It was but something to the effect of, you've always been doing stuff like this. You've always been stealing stuff and doing these little petty things, but now you've just went too far now. Like, this is way beyond any of that other little stupid stuff you've been doing all your life. And basically, he didn't have anything to say to me. He didn't know what to say. And he came around. I mean, he did. I would write him letters sometimes when I felt like I needed to, and he would write me back. It was very few and far between. He never came to see me, so I didn't see him for them 7 years.
7 years you didn't see him?
No.
Wow.
Not once. Not even one time. But then, of course, after I got out, he said I just didn't want to see you like that. So, but let's don't go down that path. I mean, we've already established I never really had a relationship with him. Growing up, I didn't really have a relationship with him when I was a teenager. In many ways, he was like an older brother to me because I was so close to his parents. My granny and grandfather, his parents, were the only stability, really, that I had in my life when I was a child. And I always felt like I was a disappointment to him. And this just kind of sealed the deal that, I was a disappointment to him and, go off and go to prison, do whatever you need to do. See you when you get out.
So you got done talking with him. Were you able to get a hold of anyone else or...
Later on.
So the judge told you that the minimum 25 years mandatory, meaning...
Minimum mandatory.
You're going to at least serve 25 years.
The minimum mandatory means no matter what sentence you get, you will serve a minimum of 25 years because that was the minimum mandatory. And this was like a Class A felony in Florida. And it should be. Attempted murder of a law enforcement officer. I mean, attempted murder of any person, anybody. I mean, that's a heavy case.
Okay, so that happened, but then you said, you spent 6 months or however long in jail. So what needed to happen after that? I mean, in my world, they say, okay, this is what you're serving, and then you go to prison and serve it. So
no, that's not how that works. Okay. You get charged with a crime. and then it has to work its way through the court system. You don't get charged with a crime one day and the next day go to court and resolve it. I mean, you don't even get to do that with parking tickets. It's just a process, and then there's other people ahead of you, and then it's depending on their caseload and all. It's just so many things, and then your case goes to the district attorney. They're the ones that actually prosecute the case. Then they have to build a case, and then they have to they do what they call a discovery, where they take everything that they've got against you, and then they have to give that to your attorney. So all these things, they take time. But what clogged us up and complicated everything was for us was we were charged with attempted murder of a law enforcement officer, battery on a law enforcement officer. Then I got an armed robbery charge in Bay County, which was Panama City. Initially, a kidnapping charge. They called it kidnapping. I almost lost my mind when I was like, what is it? What kidnapping? I ain't never kidnapped nobody. But it was the last robbery we did. We had some people go into a room, and my cousin knocked the doorknob off, so it would take them 15 minutes to get out. And if you move a human being against their will, that's considered kidnapping. So they charged me with kidnapping.
Wow.
Then I had an armed robbery charge in Mobile, Alabama. They came down. Then I had an armed robbery charge in Dothan. I think that was Houston County, Alabama. They came down. Then Montgomery came down. I had 2 armed robbery charges in Montgomery County because we did 2 robberies in like 1 hour apart or 30 minutes apart there. That was when we were pushing the boundary, trying to be gangsters. And then I had Shelby County come down and charge me with armed robbery. And then the feds came, and we got a federal charge that involved if you have a stolen firearm and you carry it over a state line, it becomes a federal charge. And so when they traced the gun that my cousin had back to, actually, this is embarrassing, but they traced it back to my girlfriend's stepdad, and he had reported it stolen, then now we have another charge. So all this stuff, the way it piled up on us, it was, you what do you do with that?
I mean, is it safe to say that you literally were going to be in jail or prison your whole life? With all those charges you said stacked up, if you add up all those years, if one was, the 25 minimum mandatory, I mean, it sounds like there's like no end to the years that you were going to be.
It was not. It's like this is never going to be over. Like I had other inmates that would come through and, tell you stuff because they'd been, they understood like the criminal justice system. They understood the prison system and the scoring, like how they scored you, how they sentenced you. They would always just like tell me like, ooh, this is hopeless. Like, you might as well get used to being in prison. Like, you might as well just accept your fate and be used to being locked up because you ain't getting out of prison no time soon, maybe not ever. That was the reality. And there was nothing that gave me hope that it was going to be anything other than that. Now, I know the first time I sat down and talked to, it wasn't my public defender. He had like what do you call that, where they're not the lawyer, but they're the ones that do all the work. Kind of like when Lula Mae was born. Remember?
Yeah, the nurse does.
We had got so used to the doctor, and I thought the doctor was going to be with us the whole time, and then he only like popped in once or twice. And how long were we in labor? Like 9 hours, 12 hours?
Yeah.
And then I was like, dang, they need to give an award to the nurse. Like, she's the one that was with us the whole time.
Doing all the work, yeah.
But the doctor was the one, he popped in at the last and pulled her out or whatever. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like that. He had an assistant, maybe you call it, a paralegal. I don't know.
A paralegal, yeah. I feel like I know what you're talking about.
It doesn't matter. She was the helper, and she was a little more credible than him. And I remember I met with her a lot because these cases kept coming in. I had to keep going out there and talking to her again. And she told me, she said, son, look at me. She was an older woman. She said, you're going to prison, okay? You're going to prison. So I need you to just accept that and just make peace with that. You are going to prison. And she said, but it's not going to be as long as you think it is. And so I'm like, what do you mean? Why do you say that? What are you saying? And she was just like, just trust me. You're young. You've never been in trouble. But you are going to prison. But it's not going to be as long as you think it is.
I know, but if someone were to say that to me and never been in that, I mean, what, like you said, how you responded to her, what does that mean? Does that mean 10 years? Does that mean 20 years? Does that mean,
Well, I felt like if I knew, like if I know I got to do 20
Right.
years, I could wrap my mind around it.
yes, I can
And
relate to
figure out
that.
how to like navigate
Right.
through that. But I didn't know. And I remember like being back in there and, writing letters and just trying to like process this thing, just feeling like my mind was going to snap. Like I felt like, I think I told my aunt that once in a letter. Like I feel like my mind is just going to snap because I can't. And it went on and on and on. It wasn't like we got things to work on. It's like, no, sit here and wait.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Because then you have a court date, and you have another court date, and then it turned into, getting transferred here and there, and it was a definite new chapter of my life. And for me, it was as if it was like I died, or my life died. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know how else to say that.
So you're basically waiting in jail while, like you said, the process of everything has to play out and the charges and all of that. What would you say is the one thing that stood out to you most in your period of waiting? Or like one memory or one, I mean, I know that's like fully loaded. Maybe there's many, but like the one emotion, I mean, you thought you had died and I don't know, just
Pain. It was just pain.
pain.
I mean, pain. Wake up, pain. Go to sleep, pain. Try to forget pain.
When you say pain, you don't mean physical pain. You mean like emotional.
Like emotional. And you replay. That's the thing about it. Mm-hmm. You replay everything that led up to that over and over and over and over in your mind. Like, and just wishing like you could just get in a time machine and go back and just change like if I could just change one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just one thing. If I could just, I remember I would fantasize about when we first moved to Phoenix City. Like I had to go first. My mom had some kind of job or something that she was dealing with. I don't remember the full why this was like it was, but I had to stay with some of my family in Phoenix City for a brief season. So I was given the opportunity to go stay with my mom's aunt and uncle.
Real quick, pause. Is this when you were in prison or before
When I was a
all
kid.
this? Okay,
when
you were
we first moved to Phoenix City.
Okay.
I was given the opportunity, and I think about that now, like, why did y'all ask me to choose? Like, I would never let my 10-year-old choose.
Right.
I was given the opportunity, do you want to go stay with Aunt Barbara and Uncle Gary, who are my mom's aunt and uncle, or do you want to go stay with your Aunt Brenda and her husband and her 3 kids, one of which was my co-defendant? And I remember thinking, I love them all, but Uncle Gary and Aunt Barbara, like, they're boring. They live out in the country, and I had a cousin, they have a daughter that I loved, but they were like the church-going part of my family. They were to me then they were boring.
But they were the more stable ones.
Oh, they were very stable.
Yeah.
Absolutely stable. But then my mom's sister, that was my cousin's family, it was fun to be at their house because there was always stuff to do. There's 3 boys in a rowdy neighborhood. There's just always stuff to do. So I chose that. I want to go stay with them.
And was one of those 3 boys your cousin / co-defendant?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would fantasize like if I could go back to 10 years old and choose not to do that. like choose to go to the boring house with my aunt and uncle, and go to church and whatever.
Anything that would have led you
down
different
a
path.
different path, and it's normal. Everybody, maybe not everybody, but rational thinking people, once they get in that situation, you want to go back through. You want to figure out, how did I get here? How did I get
Yeah.
here? And that was, I guess, the most, like, the part of it that tortures you the most. And then, like, knowing that it's over and there's nothing for you now. But
It's like the adrenaline kind of from the whole thing was wearing off, and the reality of the situation
yes,
was settling in.
Yes.
And the regret and the pain of decisions made on what that meant for you, and for, like you said, you brought your whole family with you in some way.
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah.
It was tough.
Well, I definitely look forward to hearing about jail life next time.
That's a little bit of a doozy, but
so many questions.
There is a difference, though. This is something that there's a difference between being in jail and being in prison. Total difference. It's two different worlds. I've done a lot of prison ministry since I've been out, and the church that we go to is very heavily involved in going in prisons in the state of Alabama. When I was going through Highlands College, my friend Trevor, he got involved with prison ministry, and he was so excited that he was going to get to go in and speak to these guys. But he wanted me to give him some pointers before he went in. And, Trevor, he's a talker.
He's very charismatic.
He's encouraged. He's good. He's a good guy. But he was telling me what he was going to tell him, and he's going into a max camp in Alabama where most people will never get out of prison. And he was going to give him his testimony, was that when he was in high school, he went to New Orleans and got drunk and rowdy and got arrested and spent, I think it was the night in jail. So he was going to tell them that he could relate to them based on that night he spent in jail in New Orleans. And I said, Trevor, please don't tell him that. You ain't been locked up, bro. You spent the night in jail. Don't tell him that. That's gonna make him resent you.
I mean, that's true, because I would absolutely not know the difference, or that there even was a difference.
Big difference.
Yeah.
Big difference. But so next week we'll talk about
jail life.
Just jail. What it was like, the smells, the food, the violence, the correctional officers, the lights. The lights never go off. You always have a light on all night long. It's like Motel 6, but not.
All night long.
The lights never go out.
It's like Motel 6. They'll keep the light on for you.
They keep the light on, but then they never turn it off, and then they never let you out. So you're there. You're there.
I remember, on a final note, I lived in Sweden and in Europe for 8 years. And when you and I were talking, it like hit you one time. You said, you've lived in a different country with a different culture. And in some ways, I've lived in a different culture that was like just a different country, meaning jail or prison. I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but
prison.
Just that it is a different culture and you live a different way, just like you would
in another country. It is. It's a different world. It's a different world. There are different rules. Mm-hmm. It's everything's different.
Yeah.
And you have to adapt to that. If you go to Sweden and you don't adapt to their ways, they're like, oh, look at the stupid American. But if you don't know how to adapt to prison, you could die. So that's going to be interesting to get into that.
Absolutely.
When we get there. All right, well, that was, I'm arrested, did a background history on how I got there, did my first couple days in jail, the aftermath, the arraignment, facing the music. What my uncle said was, if I wanted to dance, I was going to have to pay the fiddler, so I needed to figure that part out. And that was the process of figuring that out. In some ways, this is healing for me to talk about this, I think, but in other ways, it has just stirred up so many emotions in me that I thought, I've been through counseling for years and years and years. It's kind of different when you sit down and tell the story where you start and you go through it, bit by bit. Mm-hmm. So I think this is good. And I hope y'all are getting something out of this. It gets better.
I'm excited to learn about jail life next time.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to the Straight Outta Prison podcast. For more, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Look up Straight Outta Prison podcast.
Yes, we have pictures and people of things that we talk about during each episode. I have really loved being able to connect people and their faces and names and some other things that we've talked about on this platform. So, Straight Outta Prison podcast, Facebook and Instagram. And if you'd like to support our show, check out our website, teamjones.co.com/podcast. Thanks, guys.
See you soon.